He pulled from his knapsack a kerosene burner, charcoal, pliers, and chisels, shouting that he was a goldsmith. The 15-year-old caught an SS officer's eye and was spared from immediate death. That set of jeweler's tools bought time, but the horrors of Sobibor were just beginning. But his journey to that moment began with a train ride that ended at Sobibor in May 1942. In May of 1942, 15-year-old Shlomo Szmajzner stepped off a cattle car into a world that looked nothing like the death factory it would become. The Sobibor camp sat carved out of a thick pine forest in eastern Poland, quiet and peaceful under a spring sun. A sign over the gate read SS Sonderkommando, and across the tracks a wooden railway station stood beside a handful of woodcutters' cottages. The air smelled of pine, not smoke. To the boy who had survived ghettos and starvation, Sobibor seemed almost ordinary. He did not know that more than 250,000 Jews would die here, nor that he would one day help lead the largest prisoner escape of World War II. A tall SS officer in a black uniform with a silver skull on his cap walked down the line of new arrivals, calling for tailors and shoemakers. Shlomo Szmajzner shouted that he was a goldsmith, and he pulled from his knapsack a kerosene burner, charcoal, pliers, and chisels. The objects were small and grimy, but they caught the officer's eye. He ordered the boy to step aside. Shlomo lied and said his brother, cousin, and nephew were goldsmiths too. The officer let them all live. In that single moment, a set of jeweler's tools bought time for 4 Jewish boys in a place where time was measured in hours. Wagner set Shlomo to work making a gold monogram for the camp commandant, Captain Franz Stangl. The boy labored all day in an empty barracks, blowing through a glass tube to heat his charcoal, melting gold scraps into a homemade mold. Stangl was so pleased with the result that he promised Shlomo would soon join his parents, who had been sent to the showers. The boy wanted to believe him, but on the 4th day, Shlomo sent his 13-year-old nephew, Jankus, to find SS Sergeant Kurt Bolender, who had ordered a gold coin for his whip handle. Jankus opened the wrong gate and walked into a corral where 300 naked women and children were being beaten, stripped, and driven toward a building with a diesel engine throbbing behind its walls. Jankus came back trembling, unable to speak for hours. When he finally told what he had seen, Shlomo refused to accept it. Then a note arrived from a friend named Avraham, a Jew forced to work inside the gas chamber unit. Avraham wrote that the Nazis herded people into sealed barracks, started a motor, and pumped exhaust through a hole in the wall. Everyone inside choked to death. Jewish workers then pulled out the bodies and dragged them into mass graves. "I don't expect you to see me again," Avraham wrote. "If you can, escape that night." Shlomo said Kaddish for his parents and his sister, and something inside him hardened into a cold determination to survive and to avenge. In June, a shoemaker named Itzhak arrived from Zolkievka with his wife, his 5-year-old son, his parents, 4 brothers, and a sister. Wagner pulled Itzhak from the line and ordered him to make boots for the SS. Itzhak's family walked through the gate to the showers. He never saw them again. For days he refused to believe the truth, even after Shlomo showed him Avraham's letter. Then one morning, Itzhak volunteered to carry soup buckets to the gas chamber door. He bent down and peered through a crack in the wood. He saw women undressing, their children clutching their hands. He recognized no one, but he understood everything. The men who worked inside Camp 3, the killing zone, began digging a tunnel with their bare hands and scraps of metal. They planned to break out at night and lead as many Jews as possible into the forest. But the soil was sandy and loose, and the tunnel kept collapsing. The Nazis discovered it before it was finished. They lined up every second prisoner and shot them 2 at a time while the others sang German ballads. Avraham was among the dead. Shlomo watched from Camp 1 as the Ukrainians walked back with blood on their boots. The message was clear. Any attempt at resistance meant massacre. Enjoying the story? Subscribe to join us for the next one. In July, a delegation of SS officers arrived from Berlin. The prisoners peeping through their windows recognized Heinrich Himmler, the chief of the SS, standing in the field near the gas chambers. He wore a crisp uniform and gestured as if he were inspecting a factory. Captain Stangl walked beside him, pointing at the buildings, explaining the capacity of the machinery. Himmler nodded, issued a few orders, and left without staying for cognac. The very next day, construction crews arrived with lumber, bricks, and rolls of barbed wire. The camp was going to double in size. More gas chambers, more barracks, more sorting sheds. The death machine was being upgraded. Himmler also sent Lieutenant Kurt Gerstein, an SS chemist, to deliver 572 pounds of Zyklon B pellets for use in the gas chambers. Gerstein was a quiet man who had joined the SS only to discover what had happened to a relative taken to a euthanasia hospital. He inspected the carbon monoxide system at Belzec, watched the diesel engine fail for 2 hours and 46 minutes while Jews suffocated slowly inside the chambers, and decided he would not let the same thing happen at Sobibor. He told the camp inspector that the pellets had decomposed and were too dangerous to use. Then he buried them. On the train back to Berlin, Gerstein found a Swedish diplomat named Baron von Otter standing in the corridor. He talked all night, describing the gas chambers, the mass graves, the gold teeth, and the children. Von Otter sent a cable to Stockholm. The Swedish government buried it. Under the new regime, Wagner tightened discipline, organized the Jews into work brigades, supervised by kapos, fellow prisoners given whips and authority to enforce discipline, and drilled them like soldiers. The camp felt like a prison inside a factory, and the air carried the sweet, sickening stench of burning flesh from the cremation pits that now ran day and night. The survivors of the tunnel massacre were hollow-eyed and silent. They worked with their heads down, knowing that the Nazis would kill them the moment they became useless. But Shlomo hoarded gold dust in the lining of his coat and kept his tools sharp. Itzhak studied the patterns of the guards, noting which ones drank on duty and which ones slept at their posts. They did not speak of escape, not yet, but each of them began to store something small and hidden. A piece of wire, a file, a handful of nails. The prisoners who remained understood that the camp was a machine designed to kill them. They also understood that machines could be broken. Autumn arrived, and the passenger trains from Western Europe began pulling into Sobibor. The Jews stepped off in their finest clothes, carrying suitcases and claim checks. Abraham Margulies led the train brigade, dressed in blue coveralls, helping them unload. They smiled and said this was a work camp. Many Western Jews believed it. Sergeant Karl Frenzel discovered the escape and ordered the train brigade whipped, 50 lashes each. Abraham Margulies felt pain, but also a flicker of hope. Now someone outside knew, but the trains kept coming. In November, 2 new prisoners arrived. Josel, a Czech Jew from Moravia, had been caught hiding in a cellar. When SS Sergeant Frenzel asked for a volunteer nurse, Josel stepped forward. He smuggled food and medicine into the infirmary, and he devised a card system to protect sick prisoners from being sent to the gas chambers. Earlier that fall, before the winter set in, the Polish underground courier Jan Karski was preparing to deliver a message from the Warsaw Ghetto. Jan Karski reached London and delivered his report to the Polish government in exile, but his warnings failed to move the Allies to action. Winter closed in on Sobibor. Himmler returned for a second inspection in January. The SS devised brutal games, forcing Jews to fight like cocks, carry burning paper on their heads, or kneel in the snow for hours. Several prisoners hanged themselves in the barracks. Shlomo, the goldsmith, began a quiet romance with Basil, a cook who had lost her husband. She gave him a reason to hold on. Josel's infirmary became a small haven. He wrote sick cards for prisoners, giving them 3 days to recover before they were reported for death. He risked his life carrying contraband under bandages. The winter stretched on, but the prisoners who survived were learning to cling to routines, to each other, and to the thin hope that somewhere someone might be listening. In March 1943, the passenger trains from the Netherlands began pulling into Sobibor every Friday. The Dutch Jews stepped off in their fine clothes, carrying suitcases and hopes for a work camp. Among them was Selma Weinberg, a 21-year-old woman from Zwolle who had already spent months in jails and a camp called Vort. When SS Sergeant Karl Frenzel asked the young women if they were married, Selma and about 18 others were pulled aside, spared the immediate walk to the gas chambers. She was sent to Camp 2 to sort clothes, where she discovered mountains of food, silk stockings, and stolen goods from earlier transports. The truth of Sobibor came to Selma on her first night when a boy from Zwolle pointed to the orange glow above the pine trees and told her what it meant. For hours she lay in her bunk, weeping silently. But the next morning a Polish prisoner named Chaim took her under his wing. He taught her how to survive, stay invisible, never stare at beatings, and smuggle what you can. Selma listened, but she could not stay invisible. She kept a knife hidden in her pile of clothes and slashed shirts and linens in perfect condition, tossing them into the no-good pile. Chaim warned her, but she did not care. It was the only defiance she had left. A few weeks later, in April, another 15-year-old arrived at Sobibor, Thomas Blatt from Izbica. He had been caught trying to flee to Hungary and had hidden in a hospital to avoid deportation. Now he stood on the unloading platform, small and thin, locking his eyes on the SS sergeant. Frenzel noticed him and selected him as his shoe-shine boy, but Blatt never shined shoes. Instead, he found his way to the incinerator, a small shed near the east fence where papers, rags, and broken suitcases were burned. Wagner put him in charge of the fire, calling him Führermann, and gave him a one-eyed assistant named Karl. The incinerator became Blatt's sanctuary. He could read books on the job, and when transports came, he often found gold or money stashed in the junk he burned. The penal brigade, however, was no sanctuary. Wagner and Sergeant Gomersky ran it with vicious efficiency. Any prisoner who was a second late for roll call or who fell asleep at work was assigned to the penal brigade, where everything had to be done at a run, carrying logs, eating, even marching. Most Dutch Jews could not last 3 days. They collapsed from exhaustion and were shot or sent to Camp 3. As soon as one died, another was pulled from the next transport. That same April, far to the northwest, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising broke out. A few hundred young Jews with pistols, rifles, and homemade grenades attacked German soldiers. The battle lasted nearly a month. In London, Shmuel Zigiel-Boehm, the Bund representative on the Polish National Council, received news that the ghetto was burning and that the Allies had done nothing. Zigiel-Boehm had already urged his colleagues to stage a hunger strike, to die slowly while the world watched, hoping to shake the world's conscience. On May 12th, he wrote farewell letters and swallowed a cyanide capsule in his London flat. "I cannot live while the remnants of the Jewish population are perishing," he wrote. "My death may achieve what my life could not." In the spring of 1943, 2 Jews escaped by digging under the south fence behind the carpenter shop. The Nazis discovered the hole afterward. Frenzel ordered an immediate roll call, pulled every 10th prisoner, and marched them toward Camp 3. But Johnny Niemann, Sobibor's deputy commandant, intervened. He let every other condemned Jew return to the ranks. 10 shots echoed across the yard. The message was clear. Any escape attempt would bring reprisals. On July 23rd, the last Dutch transport arrived. For weeks there had been gaps, and now the train stopped entirely. Then a different kind of transport pulled in from the concentration camp at Majdanek. The doors slid open, and the prisoners saw a pile of living skeletons in striped uniforms. They were too weak to walk, too weak to crawl. They lay in the sand, groaning. Shlomo Szmajzner, who had been in the camp for over a year, recognized one of them as his cousin Medjer from Puławy. He tossed bread over the fence, but the other skeletons tore it to pieces before Medjer could reach it. The Nazis beat dozens to death for sport. By morning, only 1 in 10 could stagger to Camp 3. The rest were dead or dying. Magnetic transport was a turning point. The prisoners understood that the killing was almost finished. The regular transports from Western Europe had stopped. But the killing was not quite finished. In the mechanic's shop, in the shoemaker's barracks, in the women's knitting room, whispers of revolt grew louder. They had to act before the last transport left, before the Nazis liquidated the camp. But how could over 400 unarmed prisoners overcome 35 SS men, 200 Ukrainian guards, and a minefield? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the summer heat settled over the Forest of the Owls. On September 23, 1943, a train from Minsk pulled into Sobibor carrying 80 Soviet Jewish prisoners of war. Among them was a Red Army officer named Alexander Pechersky. He was 34 years old, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen the front lines. The guards drove the new arrivals into Camp 1 with whips and rifle butts, but Pechersky did not flinch. He studied the fences, the watchtowers, and the faces of the other prisoners with the cold attention of a soldier. The Polish Jews in Camp 1 recognized something different in this man. He was not broken like the Dutch, not hollow like the survivors from Majdanek. He spoke Yiddish, knew military discipline, and carried himself like a commander. Within days, Szmajzner and the other prisoners began pulling him aside, whispering about revolt. Pechersky listened. He asked careful questions about the guard rotations, the armory, the daily routine. Then he agreed to lead them. The committee formed in secret. Pechersky, Szmajzner, Blatt, and a handful of others met in the carpenter shop and the tailor barracks, always with a lookout posted. They faced impossible odds, over 400 unarmed prisoners against 35 SS men and 200 Ukrainian guards, with a minefield surrounding the camp. Pechersky told them they had one weapon the Germans did not expect, the element of surprise. The SS believed Jews could never organize resistance. They would prove them wrong. Through early October, the plan took shape. The key to the armory was a thick iron piece, heavy in the hand, kept in the quartermaster's office. The committee learned that several capos had access to that room. If the capos could lure individual SS officers into the workshops under the pretense of fittings for boots or uniforms, trusted prisoners would kill them silently with axes and knives. Once the officers were dead, the armory could be seized. The date was set for October 14, 1943 at 4 in the afternoon. Pechersky insisted on a late afternoon start so that darkness would cover the escape. The plan was surgical: kill the SS staff quickly, grab the rifles, and storm the main gate before the Ukrainian guards understood what was happening. Szmajzner would handle the weapons cache. Blatt would help distribute axes from the carpenter shop. Weinberg and the women would stay in their barracks until the shooting stopped, then run. In the final days before the revolt, the tension in Camp 1 was almost unbearable. The prisoners went about their work with blank faces, afraid that a glance or a whisper would betray them. Pechersky moved from shop to shop, checking preparations, repeating the signal. A single whistle blast meant the killing had begun. Everyone knew the penalty for failure. The Germans would torture them for days before shooting them. On October 14th, at precisely 4 in the afternoon, the signal came. In the tailor shop, a capo told SS Sergeant Joseph Wolf that a new uniform needed fitting. When Wolf bent over to examine the sleeve, 2 prisoners dropped a heavy trunk on his head and killed him with an axe. In the shoe shop, a similar trap caught SS Sergeant Siegfried Gracious. The killings spread through the workshops with brutal speed. Within minutes, 9 SS men were dead. 1 was missing and 2 Ukrainian guards had been shot. Blatt heard the commotion from his incinerator shed. He picked up an axe and ran toward the main yard, his heart pounding. Szmajzner and several others reached the armory and broke the lock. Inside were rifles, pistols, and ammunition, enough to arm maybe 50 men. The rest of the prisoners would have to run unarmed. Pechersky gave the order: open the main gate and head for the forest. Selma Weinberg was in the sorting barracks when the shooting started. Through the window, she saw prisoners running past the administration building, some carrying rifles, others empty-handed. A Ukrainian guard on a watchtower opened fire. Weinberg grabbed her friend Chaim by the arm, and they joined the rush toward the gate. The minefield lay beyond it, hidden in the sandy soil. The first prisoners to reach the open ground outside the gate stepped on the buried mines. The explosions ripped through the ranks, throwing bodies into the air. Screams mixed with gunfire. Some prisoners froze in terror. Pechersky shouted from behind the crowd, pointing to the safe paths where the mines had already detonated. "Follow the dead," he yelled. "Their bodies have cleared the way. Dozens more died in the minefield." The Ukrainian machine gunners in the watchtowers fired into the fleeing mass, cutting down men and women as they ran. But the survivors kept moving, climbing over the bodies of their friends and pushing deeper into the pine forest. Behind them, the camp gate hung open, and the SS headquarters was a smoking ruin. By nightfall, approximately 300 prisoners had escaped into the surrounding woods. The SS and Ukrainian guards hunted through the darkness with dogs and flashlights. Those who had hidden inside the camp, about 159 Jews, were rounded up the next morning. The Germans marched them to the gas chambers and executed them. The Sobibor death camp, which had murdered over 250,000 people, fell silent. The escapees split into small groups to avoid detection. Szmajzner and his brothers stumbled through the forest, their boots torn and their clothes soaked with swamp water. Blatt hid in a barn belonging to a Polish farmer who demanded money for his silence. Pechersky led a band of former Red Army soldiers east, hoping to cross the Bug River and find the partisans. The German pursuit was relentless. Armored cars patrolled the roads. The Luftwaffe buzzed the treetops, searching for movement. One by one, the escapees were caught and shot. Others died of exposure, hunger, or at the hands of anti-Semitic Polish farmers who turned them in for a reward. Of the 300 who fled Sobibor, barely 50 would survive the war. On October 19th, 5 days after the revolt, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler ordered a halt to Operation Reinhard. The Red Army was advancing and the evidence had to be destroyed. The SS dismantled the gas chambers, razed the barracks, and planted pine saplings over the mass graves. Sobibor, the Forest of the Owls, was erased from the map. The story of those who escaped could not be buried. About 40 escapees reached the Soviet partisan units operating in the Parsu Forest. They fought alongside the partisans through the winter, raiding German supply lines. Pecharsky led a group of former Red Army prisoners east toward the Bug River. They crossed into Soviet-held territory in late 1943. The NKVD interrogated him for weeks. They could not believe that a Soviet officer had survived a German death camp and returned alive. He was assigned to a penal battalion and sent back to the front. In July 1944, the Red Army pushed through eastern Poland and liberated the Sobibor region. The soldiers found no camp. The SS had razed every building. They had dismantled the gas chambers brick by brick. They had planted pine saplings over the mass graves in neat, straight rows. The Forest of the Owls had swallowed the killing ground. A few hundred yards away, the railway spur still cut through the trees, rusting and silent. The survivors emerged from their hiding places one by one. They came out of barns and root cellars and partisan camps. They returned to the site and found only young pines and uneven ground. The soil was mixed with ash and bits of bone. There was no camp to point to, no evidence above ground. The Nazis had tried to erase Sobibor from history. Only the living could keep the memory. After the war, the survivors searched for family. Almost none found anyone. They testified at war crimes trials in Poland and Germany, giving the evidence that the Nazis had tried to bury. In 1978, Brazilian authorities captured Gustav Wagner, who had fled to South America after the war. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Before he could serve a full term, he took his own life in his cell. Yankus, Shlomo's nephew, did not survive the escape. Avraham, who had sent the warning note, died in the tunnel excavation. Jan Karski survived the war and testified about the Holocaust before Allied leaders. Mordechai Goldfarb, the camp painter, escaped and later testified at the Wagner trial. Muzmo Gilles Boehm committed suicide in London to protest Allied inaction. The survivors carried the story of Sobibor with them across the decades, ensuring the world would not forget today. A monument stands at Sobibor. The pine trees still grow there, straight and tall. But the truth lives in the words of those who escaped. They spoke so that the 250,000 who did not escape would not be forgotten. Their voices are the only thing the Nazis could not bury. If you have family stories or historical accounts from this era, please share them in the comments below. We read everyone. Subscribe to the channel and give this video a like to support our future historical documentaries. Thank you for listening.